The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Israel launches airstrikes into Syria. A large Judaica collection goes under the hammer. What Jewish groups could be doing to stop sex trafficking. And more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Israel launched 2 airstrikes against targets in Syria at the end of last week. The claimed targets were weapon shipments allegedly on their way from Iran to Hezbollah. This latest news suggests the myriad ways that the ongoing civil war in Syria, as well as unrest in the region broadly, could ensnare the Jewish state. Various state sponsors of terrorist groups on either side of many conflicts in the region and in Syria create an increasingly complex web of interests that the entire Western world is trying to navigate. But for Israel, of course, the potential consequences of failure are far more direct and immediate. In this case, Hezbollah is the force occupying Lebanon that has long been supported by the government of Syria's President Bashar Assad and is also backed by Iran. While Israel has joined all other Western countries in refusing to actively take sides in the Syrian conflict thus far, it has repeatedly said that it would block shipments of so-called game-changing weapons to Hezbollah. Further indicating the complexity of the situation is the promised involvement of one of the more radical Palestinian groups, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, which has been fighting for Assad's side in Syria. It announced this week that it had received approval from Assad to, quote, attack Israeli targets. The key backers of Assad's government on the diplomatic front have included not only Iran, but also China and Russia. China's foreign ministry released a statement opposing other governments intervening in Syria after the airstrikes without mentioning Israel explicitly, declaring, quote, we oppose the use of military force and believe any country's sovereignty should be respected. The statement came as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was actually in China on a diplomatic effort largely related to Israeli companies' economic interests there. But at the same time as Israel and so many Western countries are trying to thread the needle on the right approach to Syria, renewed efforts from the administration of President Barack Obama to see an Israeli-Palestinian peace process move forward continue to bear fruit. Multiple reports suggest that the Israeli government is holding back approval for new construction in some West Bank settlements without any official announcement of a new policy. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has repeatedly called for a freeze on settlement construction as a precondition for peace negotiations. On Israel's domestic issues, further news that women's prayer services could remain legal at the Western Wall arrived this week. Israel's Attorney General has decided not to appeal a judge's ruling allowing women to hold public prayer in a minyan, wear prayer shawls, and read aloud from Torah scrolls at the holy site. But that doesn't mean that women's prayer groups are guaranteed to have these rights in the future. It's possible that a non-government group could sue and see the matter brought again to the Israeli Supreme Court. And the law governing activity at the Western Wall is currently being considered for changes, with Religious Services Minister Naftali Bennett leading those efforts. JTA reports that Bennett met with the leader of the group Women of the Wall, Anat Hoffman, and that Hoffman told JTA, quote, we felt a feeling that he was listening to us, adding, he heard there was a lot of interest and concern about us among world Jewry. He wants to know that it's possible to work with us. In what the JTA describes as a gesture of goodwill, it reports that Hoffman told Bennett that her group will not read from a Torah scroll at its upcoming prayer services at the Western Wall, even though it is now legally allowed to do so. Such a reading would have been the first at the Western Wall site in more than 10 years. Moving on to another issue of women's rights for which advocates are calling for greater Jewish interest and involvement, a recent conference on sex trafficking said Jewish advocates could be doing more. Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports.
Sex trafficking is not an issue commonly associated with the Jewish community, but a conference at the UJA Federation of New York is seeking to educate and mobilize the community around this form of modern slavery, which has affected Jewish women and girls more than you might think.
Trafficking, as you know, is a lucrative business, $32 billion a year. It's high profits and low risk.
Susan Stern is the chairperson of the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, which was recently tasked to issue a report with recommendations on how to combat human trafficking. The term refers to the illegal trade in human beings for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation, and it is a global industry. Though definitive statistics are hard to come by, estimates put the number of people forced into sexual servitude, forced labor, or bonded labor each year at 20.9 million. Almost 60% of those are trafficked specifically for sexual exploitation. The vast majority are women, and especially girls.
The average age of that a pimp recruits a girl into prostitution is 12 to 14 years old. And when I saw this statistic initially, I thought, no way, this is impossible. But working as a prosecutor, the average age of girl that I saw was about 15 years old. And typically, she told me that she had been in the life for 2 to 3 years. So I do think that this is a very accurate statistic.
These were just some of the eye-opening statistics and stories shared at the conference, which was presented by the UJA Federation of New York's Task Force on Family Violence, entitled "We Were Slaves, the Jewish Community Unites Against Sex Trafficking." It was a title meant to evoke the Passover story of the Jewish people's exodus from slavery in Egypt and to elicit empathy for those enslaved today.
I see this as a responsibility of the Jewish community to take this on, because that's the role we're supposed to play in the world.
The conference included remarks by a Jewish victim of sex trafficking who wished to remain anonymous, so we were not allowed to film. It was one of many reminders that the Jewish community is not immune from this problem. One panel recalled the little-known history of the Jewish sex trade of the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Thousands of Jewish women and girls were trafficked from Eastern Europe to the Americas as part of what was known as the white slave trade.
And on the contemporary front, Rabbi Levi Lauer, founder of Atzum Justice Works, described the current problem of sex trafficking in the Jewish state.
One does not have sex with prostitutes, at least not in the state of Israel. I don't want to make claim for your streets. In the state of Israel, one rapes sex slaves, and the language is crucial to our understanding of the phenomenon.
For more on We Were Slaves, the Jewish Community Unites Against Sex Trafficking, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. Speaking of Jewish leaders, billionaire Michael Steinhardt is well known in the Jewish world for the funding of organizations like Birthright Israel, but less well known have been his interests in the world of Jewish art and Judaica. He's recently put up his large private collection for auction, and Meredith Gansman has that story.
Can you put a price on history? The Sotheby's auction of the Michael and Judy Steinhardt's Antique Judaica collection did just that.
Truly the greatest collection of Judaica to potentially come on the market in 50 years.
Jennifer Roth specializes in Judaica at Sotheby's and has studied the Steinhardt collection extensively. Michael and Judy Steinhardt have been accumulating Judaica since they went to Israel on their honeymoon 44 years ago. And Mr. Steinhardt started collecting tzedakah boxes.
He felt that they addressed a fundamental Jewish tenet of our faith, and that is to help the weakest members of society.
According to Roth, this collection is unique because of the number of objects dating from the 18th century or earlier, including a small amber seal with a menorah and a Byzantine bottle from the 6th or 7th century. To see more from the Michael and Judy Steinhardt Judaica collection on auction at Sotheby's, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. The acting company has cultivated many of the best-known names from Hollywood and Broadway. Meredith Gansman interviews its Jewish director on the eve of its 40th anniversary.
Every actor needs their start, and some of the best from the film, television, and theater community, from Kevin Kline, Rainn Wilson, and Patti LuPone, got theirs with the acting company. And in their 40th anniversary, they're still bringing theater across the country like few others can.
It allows young actors to get experience that they would never get otherwise.
Their alumni speaks for themselves, whether it's Patti LuPone or Kevin Kline. I know Robin Williams got his start there.
Well, the acting company is the only really touring company left that takes classics around the country to underserved communities that have no theater.
At the acting company's 40th anniversary gala, industry greats honor the company, made possible by co-founder Margot Harley, who is proud to be a part of the Jewish heritage of the American theater.
There are lots of Jews in the theater because Jews are smart and creative. And I don't know, they seem to be drawn by the theater, by the arts in general.
Harley founded the company with film actor and producer John Houseman after graduating from the Juilliard School.
John Houseman and I were at Juilliard 40 years ago, and our first class from the drama division was graduating, and this was 1972, and we thought that they should be kept together, that we shouldn't let them scatter, that they were very well trained, but they didn't have enough performance experience. So we determined to keep them together as a company. And in order to keep them together, we really had to tour them, because we couldn't have kept them together in New York City. Nobody would have gone to see over and over a young company like that.
Since its creation, the company has been taking theater across the country and creating an audience for serious classical theater, especially with performances for younger audiences who might otherwise not be exposed to this art. To hear more from Margot Harley and the evolution of the acting company, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, digging deep to find and tell the stories of Jewish women of old is the goal of novelist Maggie Anton. Anton, who had been a scientist for 35 years, began exploring these stories with a popular trilogy on Rashi's daughters. Now she has a new book, Rav Chizda's Daughter, a novel of love, the Talmud, and sorcery. In a recent interview at TJC Studios, she shared not only the fascinating stories behind her characters, but also of how she came to switch careers so dramatically. Here are the highlights. You're writing fiction about the lives of daughters of some of the great sages of Jewish history. How did you come upon that? And what do you find so interesting about it?
Well, I came upon it accidentally when in 1992, 20 years ago, I heard about a women's Talmud class being taught by Rachel Adler. And she started this class because in Los Angeles, where I live, there was no place a woman could go to study Talmud. And so she started the class, and I must admit I signed up for it because I wanted to see what was this stuff that Jewish women weren't supposed to study. My Talmud experience consisted of having read The Chosen by Chaim Potok. But I signed up for the class, and to my astonishment, I fell in love with Talmud. It has become my passion. I still study regularly, over 20 years later. And being in a woman's Talmud class, Rachel points out that Rashi, frankly, the greatest Jewish scholar ever, more Jews study his works every day than any other Jewish scholar, had no sons, only daughters, reputed to be learned, reputed to wear tefillin. And I decided to see if those legends were true. I started doing research just for my own fun.
You tell a story of fascinating parts of Judaism that aren't as much talked about these days. The broader magical sensibility, a broader kind of a folk religion that has a lot going on that's not just about books, and it's not just about specific religious and ritual practices.
Yeah, the subtitle is, a novel of love, the Talmud, and sorcery. But I had no idea the sorcery part was going to be in there. I discovered that a little later on in my research when I was trying to find source of women's names from Talmudic times, and I came across information on things called Babylonian incantation bowls, which come from 4th to 6th century Babylonia. They're the only archaeological evidence we have for the time of the Talmud. And these were magic spells written on bowls, like regular pottery, nothing fancy. And they were buried under people's houses, and the incantations were to protect the inhabitants of the house from demons, from the evil eye, from illnesses, from curses, keep women safe in pregnancy. And archaeologists have now found they were ubiquitous in that time period. You can no longer say, oh, they belong to some weird group of superstitious folks.
You've got a very interesting story of how you came to be writing these books. You told us earlier how you started researching Rashi's daughters and then Rav Chizda's daughter for these 4 books that you've done now. But you took to writing pretty much as a result of that.
Rashi's daughters was the first thing I ever wrote. I mean, I didn't keep journals. Maybe I wrote letters to my husband when he was in the Army. And I didn't even take English in college. But what I was a voracious reader, and I devoured novels, and not particularly historical fiction, science fiction, murder mysteries, romances, kids' books. And I was so fascinated by what was going on in 12th century, 11th century France in Jewish women's communities that somehow something just compelled me, possessed me to write about it.
You can see the full interview with Maggie Anton under the Interviews category on the Jewish Channel On Demand on cable. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.